8 billion and counting. In less than half a century, the planet's population's doubled. We know humanity's carbon footprint is unsustainable. How about its birth rate? The two are closely tied, but the answer for many a nation is not as straightforward as it seems. Take India, due in the coming year to overtake an aging China as the world's population leader. It's got 1.4 billion mouths to feed on limited resources, but it's also got a slowing birth rate, which means a fast aging population of its own. Where do the priorities lie as the COP27 climate summit in Egypt negotiates the long term, how rich countries help finance the transition to a more sustainable way of life? There's also the short term, G20 nations meeting in Singapore with the specter of recession spooking leaders. They want growth. Crucial to both the short and long term is how many babies we bring into this world. Today in the France 24 debate, how to manage the planet's record population. With us, activist and academic Henri Landès, author of Repopulating the Countryside, How to Organize the Urban Exodus to Meet the Climate Emergency. It's published in French so far. Is it due for a translation?
I got to get on it.
You got to get on it. Okay. Thanks for being with us. Geographer Ankit Sikarwar, research fellow at the Institute for Demographic Studies here in Paris. INED, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
From Bath in southwest England, Melanie Shannon, reader in social policy at the University of Bath. Is it Shannon or Shannon? Which do you prefer?
It's Shannon, actually.
Okay. Well, you are welcome. From the Washington suburb of Arlington, Virginia, Jack Goldstone, professor of public policy at George Mason University. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's begin with congratulations and long life to the newest edition of the Agarwal family. Dateline Ghaziabad in India's Uttar Pradesh state. These among several proud parents there at this maternity hospital on this Tuesday, November 15th, the day humanity welcomes its 8 billionth member.
I just want that she should be secure enough. I mean, like in both sense, physically and emotionally. Like, I mean, I want to give her the best. That's it. I can say right now.
So there it is, the pleasure of being a proud mother. Let me begin with you, Henri Landès. What does 8 billion humans mean for you?
Well, I'm a very happy father, young father. I have a 2-year-old. There's nothing more in the sense of humanity and its very basic function on Earth, and more of a pleasure to have children. We have a lot of people on the planet compared to a century ago. And like you mentioned, finite resources, a climate that is changing, biodiversity loss, and lifestyles that are changing, emerging, but pressure on these finite resources that is too important. Does that mean we should limit the population? I'm not in favor of restrictions or of giving lessons. I think it's important to realize what a happy family and happy population would be tomorrow. That's definitely knowing how to live in a more sustainable way, first off. It is not fair to start saying we're too populous today because countries have developed in a different way. And the industrialized world led the way in terms of developing non-sustainable lifestyles. You can't just turn then to India and African countries and say you're too populous, because that is where demography is changing more rapidly. However, we also have this issue of it's older people living longer, and that's what's making a big change. And that's a big, difficult debate to have, is how long do we keep people either healthy or not in great health as long as we can. So it's a very complex issue that requires a discussion across different stakeholders and with the citizens. But the bottom line is we need more sustainable lifestyles. And in my opinion, we need to repopulate rural areas, because that connects us more directly with nature and natural resources and kind of favors more sober lifestyles, including in a modern society.
And we'll talk about that, because that is the heart of your book that we were mentioning at the outset. Melanie Shannon, do you agree that this isn't the kind of thing you can legislate about?
I do agree. Historically, we've tried a variety of population policies in various countries. There are some very famous coercive population policies, for example, the one-child policy in China. But research suggests that actually a lot of women who, under that policy, had fewer children would have chosen to do so anyway because of economic development. And now the Chinese want to raise their birth rate again. They've introduced a three-child policy. And it's not been enormously effective because it turns out that actually women are quite happy to have fewer children under the right circumstances.
But let me ask you, what do you say, Melanie, to residents of Lagos who are watching us, or Nigeria as a whole, which is headed towards what, 400 million people?
So yes, you're absolutely right that population is growing very rapidly in sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. Actually, a great deal of the increase in population between now and 2050 is going to come from African countries. But at the same time, the amount of CO2 emissions that are produced in those countries is incredibly low compared to those produced in high-income countries. And there is a tussle here because one of the greatest contraceptives is development and also education. But of course, when you develop, you then tend to produce more emissions.
That is the quandary there. I just want to discuss something. The year was 1974, the year we reached 4 billion, an extra billion added since, roughly every 11 or 12 years. And when I was growing up, there you see the chart showing what it's been like since, 5000 BC to today. We see how much it's gone up. When I was growing up, I stumbled on a paperback picked up at a yard sale. It was a 1968 bestseller called The Population Bomb. It predicted famine and catastrophe as the planet's population seemed to spiral out of control. Jack Goldstone, at the time, I was a teenager, worrying about global thermonuclear war. It was still the Cold War. And then I had this new anxiety, having looked at that book. When you wrote a piece a few years back talking about the new population bomb, is this a possibility, or is this basically, are we still headed towards something grim?
I don't think we're headed towards something grim. I think we can be fairly optimistic. We headed off that old population bomb of incredible rapid population growth simply by bringing development to Asia, excuse me, and investing in green agriculture. Now, what that tells us is we're going to need another wave of technological change. Just as we made agriculture more efficient, we're going to have to make energy cleaner and more efficient. But this is clearly already underway. Solar power, wind power are already cheaper than dirty coal almost everywhere in the world. I'm happy to say, for example, that India's billionaires are investing in clean hydrogen. That is, hydrogen to replace fossil fuels, but hydrogen that's produced from clean power sources. So I think we're well on our way. When you ask what does 8 billion mean, I think it means we're at another fork in the road. We can choose policies that will help the world adjust and adapt to 8, 9, or even 10 billion by shifting to clean energy, or we can go on with business as usual, and that will endanger all of us, because whether it's rich countries continuing to produce a lot of carbon or developing countries that have a growing population and growing energy use, and if they're not on a clean energy trajectory, they will produce more carbon in the future. I think we all have to be partners. We all have to work together in shifting to this cleaner energy world. The good news is the technologies are now affordable. What we need to do is make some of the initial investments, some of the initial capital assistance to help all countries get on the pathway toward implementing a clean energy environment.
But our way of living has always been based on extraction industries. And again, we can go green, but there's still limited resources on this planet.
Well, that's the good news about solar and wind energy. They're really not limited. Every day, enough solar energy falls on the earth to power pretty much all the electricity we use now and then some. It's just a matter of capturing that energy. It's true that some resources are finite. If we chop down the Amazon rainforest, we're not going to get that back. The same is true for the boreal forests in the north of Russia and Europe and North America. But other resources can be multiplied. We can grow more food more efficiently. We can produce more energy with clean resources. And frankly, we have a lot more human ingenuity coming on board with the growth of a new generation of youth in Africa that's just waiting to become productive and anxious to contribute to a more prosperous world. So I think we put a really negative shade on things if we talk about the world being finite, period. Certain things are finite. We can't destroy our atmosphere. We can't destroy our forests. We can't destroy our oceans. But other things we can multiply, just like we met the old population bomb and defused it with a green revolution, showing the way to be more productive in producing food. That change is still underway. And I think the change to clean energy will be another green revolution that can take us forward.
All right. Whether or not you bet on clean energy, effectively saving humanity, is a debate among environmentalists. Some of them have long argued that fewer babies was the only solution. There's even a movement called GINK, which stands for Green Inclination No Kids. France 24's team in Mumbai, well, it found the Indian equivalent. It's a report read by Navodita Kumari.
Mumbai, the commercial capital of India, is one of the most populated cities in the world with over 25 million people. For Rafael Samuel, this overpopulation is plaguing the country. Early on in his life, he decided not to have any children. Disguised in a fake beard, he is the face of anti-natalist movement. In 2019, with the aim of raising awareness about overpopulation, he sued his parents for giving birth to him without his consent.
There's just no consciousness. Every poor person, middle class person, lower middle class person. Here it's almost not a question. Like it's a thing, you have to have children. If the government can, they have to stop everyone from having children. Then they have to decide who has one child mandate, two child mandate.
According to the United Nations, in 2023, India will surpass China as the world's most populous country with 1.4 billion people. Half of its population will be under the age of 25. Married for 14 years, Jeet and his wife Jagruti have decided not to have children due to the exploding population of the country. They believe their choice to be child-free makes them financially more secure and boosts their married life.
Thank you. Many people may disagree with this fact, but actually it is like that if you want to live your own life, you cannot live your own life when you have a baby because it's a 20-year commitment, right? We can give more time to each other as a couple. So I think that is one of the essential things in any married life.
But not everyone around them understand their decision.
My coworkers were mocking me a lot. They were saying that I'm not responsible enough, that I was running away from my responsibilities.
In big cities, people have been coming together to discuss the perks of being child-free, an idea that's against Indian family norms. This group of friends who met on social media have all decided not to have children. Today, they are meeting to share their experiences.
I saw the difficulties which I was facing as a child, as I was facing as a young woman who was trying to make her mark in this world. And everybody around me was struggling to make even the ends meet, right? And that something made me think, it's like if I'm going to have a child, I'm just going to add that to the population which is already there. And I'm going to create a suffering for my child before it's even born.
Every day, nearly 70,000 children are born in India. With the current rate, the country's population is likely to peak by 2047 at about 1.6 billion.
Ankit Sikawar, is this the kind of conversation that's limited to the sort of elite bubbles in India?
Yeah, it's quite prevalent. And I'm happy to see a lot of discussion on India, what we are having. And I would say like India's population has increased, and it is increasing with a steady growth rate, and we are going to surpass China in the next year, and we will be the rank one.
Because India's not a monolith, is it? You have some states where it's growing rapidly and others not. What's the difference?
Yeah, the root cause of this heterogeneity among the fertility rates among the states is based on its cultural practices. More, I would say it's a more societal thing, because if you say the India's fertility has declined from 6 children in 1950 to now 2 in 2022, below replacement levels. But we still have few states with fertility above 4 and few like more than like less than 1.5 also.
You say culture. Is it down to culture, or is it purely down to economics? You heard Melanie earlier saying how development is the best contraception.
Yeah, the young couples are more worried about the economic consequences. But the root, as I said, the fertility has declined, population growth is stabilizing, but it has not coincided well with the choice of women to get married at particular age, or to have children, or how many children they want, or to not have children at all. So these things are not yet clear. So I would say it's more social. And then the couple like me and my wife, we always think about the economic consequences of having a baby, just like what we have seen from the lady who has given the Agrawal a girl child, and see what she told, particularly about her security. Like these things are more worried, questionable for the young couples these days, and I think it determines a whole picture.
You were born in the countryside. Over there, does it still make sense to have more babies? Is that your social security when you get old?
Yeah, being from a village, I would say, like, people don't see the statistics. They only understand the economic consequences, the part of security. If specifically if she's a girl child, her security and those things. Like and one more thing, the healthcare expenditure. It's too high because in villages, first access to the healthcare, and then even if they are accessible, whether they are affordable or not, it is a big question.
Melanie Shannon, I know you've studied demographic trends in South Asia. India's worried that it could be the next China, that the birth rate slows down too fast. What have you found?
It's true, the birth rate has already slowed dramatically in India. As we just heard, the total fertility rate is down to 2, and there are states where it is, I believe, as low as just over 1, which is incredibly low. And that has already led to a rapidly aging population. But of course, India also is not as developed as some other countries with that kind of fertility rate. So there are challenges in terms of propping up social support systems and providing for old people when you lack children. Traditional support systems would involve sons supporting you in your old age, and there is very strong son preference in India. And combined with that, there is sex-selective abortions, so there is a tendency to abort girl children because the preference for sons is so strong, but that is combined with a desire for small family sizes. And the result of those two things is that you will abort girl children, which is obviously not a great situation. For me, India's way out of this is quite obviously education, but also gender equality and empowerment of women, because that addresses all of the issues. There is... Sorry.
No, I was listening to what you're saying. Go on, just finish your point, because I want to pick up on that.
So all I was going to say was that actually India has still quite a large number of young people, and they are underutilized in the workforce to some extent, especially women. So there is a massive opportunity there for India. This doesn't have to be a negative.
Now, both you, Melanie, and we heard Henri Landès at the outset of this conversation saying you don't like edicts from on high deciding whether or not you can have kids. Uttar Pradesh, which is India's most populous state, last year introduced a draft bill to push a two-child policy there. UP's Hindu nationalist Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, seen here behind the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. His is one of several states considering ways to control the population. Now, this draft bill suggests incentives and penalties. Incentives for civil servants who have more than 2 children, and penalties rather, and incentives for those who have less. For Adityanath, there's a caveat. While it's important to progress on this front, he says, a situation of disturbance and public harmony, these are statements he made in July, should also not be created. It should not happen that a particular community's rate of population growth is more, if we understand correctly, Ankit Sikarwar, he's a Hindu nationalist. He's worried that the Muslim population might grow faster. And you start getting into identity politics here.
First of all, it's not my personal view. And being a researcher and a demographer, I completely I have a disagreement with this thought, like one particular segment of population will boom like anything, because I believe in data, I believe in statistics. So first is that thought, and second part is about Uttar Pradesh and what the government of Yogi Adityanath is proposing there. I see it as a scientific step also, like apart from the religious controversies which the activists are raising. I also see it as an opportunity to make UP little bit of under control of its population bomb, because right now why we are here, we are saying it's 8 billion, and maybe we will need another debate to debate about Uttar Pradesh population. Okay, Uttar Pradesh have this population and it has challenges, but I would see like there may be a positive and negative of this, but as a demographer, I am seeing it a more positive step towards the population control in a particular place, UP, which we are talking like. It is comparable to several countries.
Well, let me get you to fact check just statistics from the Pew Research Center. They say India's Muslim population is growing faster, but they're not remotely expected to overtake Hindus. This is the national trend, saying by the year 2050, the Muslim portion of the population will increase by 76%. However, it'll still be less than a quarter compared to the Hindu population. That's in line with what you've seen in terms of statistics?
Yeah, definitely. And even if you see the policy, it's not targeted towards a particular religion. It's for the total population.
Right.
Like we have certain states which have higher Muslim population, and Uttar Pradesh is one of them, leading. And then we have Bihar and those things. Even the Hindu societies also have, Hindu families also have fertility, like anything. Like they have a higher fertility, and they also need this step. I'm not so pessimist about it, clearly. Yeah.
Right. The increase in the number of people on this planet, the different reactions among environmentalists, you spelled it out at the outset. It's figuring out ways to make the planet and our countries more sustainable. On the right, there is this talk about how with this population increase, it's a surge in identity politics. During the French presidential campaign, there were far-right candidates talking about the great replacement, that somehow the population increasing means that we'll have fewer white people than before, fewer European origin people. Henri Landès, is this also going to get worse as the population grows on the planet?
Identity politics? Unfortunately, we keep seeing history repeat itself. I thought we were on some kind of linear progress in terms of living together. It doesn't seem to be the case. I'm optimistic in the sense that we were able to push it away a little bit in 2020 in the United States. but it seems to still exist a little bit. We have maybe the former president trying to run again with a platform that is going to include that. Throughout France, the discussion is a little bit more complex. There's a little bit of I believe it's a little bit more of an intelligent debate on the extreme right wing, and a little bit more legitimacy in a distancing of notably rural populations and deindustrialized areas as well. So it's not only a fear of Arabs and of Muslims in France that's going to mark that. Unfortunately, that'll be a symbol of it. But I'm confident that if we're able to deal with sustainability and an ecological transition, we're going to solve this issue of not knowing how to live together. And I'm not saying it's a panacea, but it better become the highest priority, because I agree with what has been said about technology that will help us grow food, that will help us go to clean energy. But we need to complement that with understanding how to be as eco-friendly as possible in our daily lives. And so it's what education and what development is necessary now so that we don't repeat the same mistakes in the past, and that everybody feels like they can make choices in their families and the number of kids, for example, but also where they live and how they live in the most eco-friendly and sustainable way. And that means that we need to understand what kind of consumption do we have every day. And that's not saying that it's about just constraining people. I moved from the city to a rural area. I changed diets. I changed a lot of consumption habits. That doesn't mean I cut everything out. It just means I do a little bit less of certain things. And when I do have that type of consumption that was in excess before, it's a party, if so to speak.
It's a special occasion.
Absolutely. I appreciate it much more. So I think that we need to work on what kind of education on sustainability is being implemented and what kind of territorial management. The truth, when I worked at the Good Planet Foundation, we had a project that took place in India. We implemented biogas reservoirs in rural families that ameliorated the air quality in their homes and allowed them to move away from gas and kerosene to heat their water. Those families were then able to stay in rural areas and live in a sustainable way and less polluted way and continue their job and not move to cities that are becoming more and more populated and they're disconnected from nature and natural resources. And I think that's a very important aspect of the debate that needs to come in.
Jack Goldstone, you're in the United States. You just had elections there. The U.S., a country of immigration historically. Is this conversation happening where you are?
Well, quite certainly. There's concern that foreigners of different religion or different background will somehow overwhelm or change American society. Now, we've had those concerns spring up periodically throughout American history, but they've always proven to be overblown, mistaken concerns. Because, in fact, the people who move to America want nothing more than to become good Americans. They value exactly the same freedoms and opportunities that all Americans are proud to call our own. Now, the number of Muslims, for example, in the United States is around 2 to 3% of the population. There's no danger that an increase in the number of Muslim immigrants will somehow change our character.
But there's Jack, there's a lot of discussion about the identity politics. Is there as much discussion about what you heard Henri Landès just mention, ways to make it more sustainable to live far from the big cities?
Well, I think there are two discussions there. One is how each of us can contribute to making the world a more sustainable place. Eat less meat, for example. Be careful with how much trash you dispose. All of that is good, but that is not really going to change our long-term trajectory. What we need to do is think about changing the way we fuel our economy and also realize that we're all in this together. I was thrilled to see that a group of wealthy nations have offered Indonesia, another very large developing country, $20 billion to help it move away from coal-fired electricity production. That's the kind of forward thinking that we need. So we need to make progress at multiple levels in our own lives, but also with planning for the ways developing countries can move ahead.
Energy is certainly a key issue if you're going to have 8 billion plus people growing up on this planet. The curve when it comes to population expected to flatten, with deaths already set to outpace births in China. It was even a topic of conversation at the recent Communist Party Congress that rubber-stamped Xi Jinping's third term in power.
We will implement policies to stimulate the birth rate, and we will lead a national strategy to find solutions to our aging population.
But some are skeptical about the solutions that he's touting. China's middle class feels investing big and time and money on that single offspring is, as was said earlier in the conversation by Melanie Shannon, the only way to go.
Nowadays, if you want to provide a good education for your child, it's true that you have to spend a lot. It's necessary because society is so competitive. I don't think I could properly take care of a third child. 2 is enough.
Ankit Sikawar, is China's present India's future? Just have one child and heap the pressure on so they get the best grades possible at school and invest everything in that one child?
That's a good question to ask, and at the same time confusing one. And I would say, like, the time when China implemented his one child policy was completely different what the time we have right now in India, with much working age population potential. Even the number of children below 50 year of age are higher, and so the working age population is going to be higher and in the coming decades also. So it's a completely different when China implemented this policy. So and the other part is that, like, the challenge which India have actually is right now different than what China had at that time. Like, we want to create a sufficient number of employment opportunities for this huge bulk of young population. And if you look at the statistics, from every 4 graduates, only 1 graduate is employed in India, and it reduces when it comes to the women part. So the challenge is quite different. But looking at the historical trend of India's population growth, like, I still see a bright picture of India's potential to utilize this population bulk. And also, the main focus should be on the elderly population, which is about 10% of the total population of India, and about its social security at most, because we don't have it yet, and it's going to be a challenge.
Can India keep up? I mean, you're talking about so many costly things here, making sure that the elderly are cared for. If you're going to have an urban lifestyle, of course, it means you need good education, good infrastructure. Can India keep up?
Yeah, being an Indian, I am optimistic here. And there are few cases like where India is more first of all, let me say, when we talk about 1.4 billion people, it's four times higher than US population, 20 times higher than UK. So on a comparative analysis, I see a positive picture here. Like for an example, as he mentioned, that Indian billionaires are now investing in hydrogen energy. I would highlight a case of a city called Vadodara in Gujarat. They have solar panels on the river, on the canals, solar panels on the irrigation canals. So at the same time, you are not using the land, the limited resource, and you are also generating a renewable energy, which is a good step. And there may be ample of examples like this, but still the challenge is great because the population is high there. And it's not only about the numbers, it's also how people are living there.
Yeah, well, quality of life particularly.
Yes, particularly. Like for example, it is projected in Mumbai, the 40% of the population will live in the slums. It's going to be a greatest challenge to the state government.
Melanie Shannon, how has COVID and the lockdowns that took place influenced your thinking on this issue of demography and the planet's population?
So I think there's a kind of misperception that COVID has had an enormous influence on world population growth, and that's actually not the case.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of highlighting the differences between the haves and the have-nots. We reported on it coming out of India at the time, and this sort of development gap that seemed to be widening.
Well, I think COVID has really highlighted the digital gap that exists. If you, like me, have broadband at home, then you can happily hole up there, you can work from your home office, you can contact whoever you want around the world. But if you do not have internet, if you don't have those resources at home, then it makes it very, very tricky to stay at home and avoid those interactions. And we saw that in terms of differential mortality rates and infection rates for individuals who had a high income and a lower income, certainly in the UK, but also in other countries around the world.
And that brings us to your book, En Irlandais, Repopulating the Countryside, which is a nice mix of, at the same time, your personal experiences and sort of how-to for a
little bit
for these things. We had people saying, "Oh yeah, they're talking about the Great Resignation. People are going to go off to the countryside." But as you hear Melanie say, you got to have decent broadband for that.
That's for certain. For a lot of people, plenty of people live in the countryside, less connected. Some people look for being less connected, but I don't think that's what's going to drive a big portion of the population to want to live in the countryside. First of all, why do I recommend that? It's because it is easier to do several things that lead to more agency, individual level, for protecting the environment, preserving the environment. In terms of production of food, I produce our own food, and I can consume food knowing exactly, really, very detailed, how farmers are working around me. So I'm no longer in blindsided or in confusion as to where my food is coming from, and that's very important. Secondly, in terms of waste management, I have a lot less because I'm purchasing a lot less, more in bulk, etc. In terms of textile consumption, I've a lot of neighbors that make their own textile. It's these things go. They're low-tech solutions that go with the high-tech solutions. We need to combine the two. And I see a little bit more know-how in rural areas on living in a certain sobriety, which is necessary to combine with, once again, innovation, and a little bit more know-how in terms of consuming in a more responsible way. The second point is that in cities, we're very populous. We mentioned slums. We mentioned areas where you can't just continue to think that we're going to be more and more efficient in cities. At some point, the area needs to be, adequate for the number of people that are there in terms of resources, infrastructure, etc. And are we going to destroy nature by going and living more populated in nature in rural areas? No, because if you promote a sustainable lifestyle in more autonomous and resilient areas, you're going to actually find a great combination of reconnecting with rural areas and nature, more sustainable lifestyle, and using the technology where we need it, such as digitization.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because you may find yourself as well, and it's been a complaint that we heard on the campaign trail again with those election cycle we just came through in this country, of finding doctors and good schools if you go live in the countryside.
Right. We need to create a virtuous cycle once again, because I work with a lot of schools in rural areas, a lot of institutions.
But the same infrastructure questions I was asking to Ankit, are they not true for France?
No,
France
because
doesn't have the money to open.
Well, we don't have a lot of money for a lot of things, and when we need a lot of money, we create money. That's a whole other debate. That's the truth. Is we found that during COVID in France and a lot of industrialized countries, when we need to have the money, we find it. And in a lot of ways, it's a question more of a political prioritization. There's a lot of infrastructure that has been abandoned in rural areas that we can rehabilitate, that we can relive in. I also believe we need to differentiate policy between urban and rural areas, for example, on construction. If we find a small village where it would be beneficial to have 10 families so that the school runs, so that we have a few, high-level doctors that come in, different entrepreneurs, etc., that's not a disaster ecologically compared to cities that continue to grow and continue to put pressure on resources around, and we don't have any ability to restrict the growth of certain cities from a geographic perspective. So it's not interesting to just say we need to stop building things and we apply the same policy to all territories. What's interesting is to say, all right, we have areas, we have populations, and we have lifestyles, and we need to create what's necessary food-wise and necessary energy-wise on that area, and then to decide what is the best population size and how do we promote that together, working together locally and nationally.
Is that something that you see, Ankit Sikarwar? Is there the pressure building for better infrastructure? And is the infrastructure improving in rural areas in India, for instance?
That's a very interesting question and very, very relevant to me because I did my PhD on this village developments around one of the fastest growing city of India, that is Ahmedabad. I took 615 villages and I did the study for 20 years with secondary data sources. And what I found, like the carrying capacity, as Henry rightly said, that the carrying capacity of cities are fixed. We cannot alter it. But what we can do, like if we have small, like repopulating the villages is one solution, one very efficient solution. But we, particularly to India, we have one more option to focus on the small cities which are growing very fast. Why not to think about the sustainable development of those cities which are growing very fast and which are going to be the big cities in next decade? So we will have a sustainable cities. And the other question is like if you take into account Mumbai, like cities, as I said, cities have the threshold for their expansion. Like Mumbai is growing vertically now because it has natural barriers, and Delhi is spreading horizontally a lot. So it is impacting its villages. So here comes the question of natural boundaries also.
Jack Goldstone, one final question to you. It's what we mentioned at the outset. Is there a contradiction when you see the same leaders who go to the COP27 climate summit in Egypt to talk about hitting the pause button on building incessantly, and the same ones showing up in Bali for the G20 and talking up ways to increase growth?
Well, you're right. There is an obsession with growth, but we have to figure out what are the best ways for growth to happen. I don't think we want to end growth. We don't want to end population. Let me talk about two things quickly: freedom and education, that deserve more attention. I think freedom is critical. People should be free to have as few or many children as they wish. We just want to give those children an opportunity to grow and be productive in a way that's not going to be burdensome for the resources of the earth that are limited or in danger. Now, educating people is the key. It's also the key, among other things, to reducing the rate of population growth, as Melanie said. Now, India's economy is growing 7% a year. The population's growing less than 1% a year. The problem is that some areas are already in kind of higher income, smaller family situation. Other areas in the north are lower income, larger families. So it's a matter of helping them catch up. But there's a bigger issue in Africa, where you still have families with typically 4 or 5 children per household. And there we really need to focus on bringing education, particularly to women. I think the best investment that the rich countries could make is not just in dams, power systems, that kind of growth, but building high schools, particularly to enroll women across Africa, is probably the best investment in our peaceful and prosperous future that we could make.
And that'll be our final word. Jack Goldstone, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Arlington, Virginia. I want to thank Melanie Shannon for being with us from Bath, Henri Landès and Ankit Sikarwar. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.